So this week, as if I do this weekly, this week I'm in Belfast with Ian Walker. So Ian, this is your second time in Belfast. In terms of credentials, I'll probably get it wrong, but Swansea University, head of the School of Psychology.
That's right, yeah.
And what's your background before sort of getting into the academia sphere?
Well, I mean, I've been academic my whole adult life, really, and I've been working on issues of cycling, transport, environment for 20 odd years.
Brilliant. And I did read this morning that you're a current Guinness World Record holder. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, I hold the record for the fastest bike ride across Europe, north to south, which I think is quite safe at the moment because you've got to go through Russia to take on that record.
So you might hold this for a while, depending on bigger forces than you can control.
Possibly. I mean, there has been at least one person I know of who's had a go recently.
Right.
So a French woman called Natalie Bayon had a go about 2 years ago.
I didn't realize it was right. So this isn't you in a bath of beans. This is a proper award or Guinness record. So how many miles? How long?
It was, what was it? It was about something like 6,500 kilometers, and I did it in a little under 17 days.
Wow. So what are you averaging a day on that then?
It was, I think from memory, I think it was 377 kilometers a day average.
Gee. And was there a support vehicle?
No, I did it unsupported.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, you know what, your credentials are well established then. Ian, I first heard you on a podcast. I'm pretty sure it was the War on Cars podcast. And I was sort of blown away by this concept that I think you'd sort of coined, this idea of motonormativity. It really sat with lots of things that I'm interested in. I think the sort of common way of saying that is car brain. Yeah. But can you tell us a bit more about how you came to this conclusion and what the conclusion was around that?
Yeah, I think we kind of have it, we're using that term most normativity sort of refer to about two things, I think, actually. We're using it to refer to this car brain phenomenon that a lot of other people have observed over the years, this difficulty that individual people have, or this difficulty that we all have, of just envisaging a different way of travelling than cars coming first. A world where the pedestrian always stops and waits for the motorist, and obviously the cars have to go somewhere, blah, blah, blah. You know. So we use most normativity to refer to this blindness that we all have, or this double standard we all have. And we're also kind of using it to refer to the phenomenon, the phenomenon of a society that struggles to get beyond cars coming first, and the harms of motoring being accepted as just the price of doing business. And it was really with other people, so Alan Tapp and Adrian Davis at University of West of England. This largely came out of us having coffee with each other and complaining about the double standards we saw, and saying, well, look, there must be some way we can measure this. There must be some way we can pin this down, and really trying to systematize it and give it a name and explain the phenomenon.
Yeah. One part of your studies looked at people's attitudes towards things like smoke and air quality, and when you did it from a public health perspective, from cigarette smoke versus car driving, people were much more willing to take the hit when it came to car driving. The obvious argument for that is, a cigarette's never taken someone to the shops or dropped the kids off to school.
Yeah.
What is the sort of the move beyond that? Because obviously cars serve a functional purpose, which is often the argument to maintain the current transport system we have. So how do we move beyond that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, there are clear differences between cars and cigarettes. Although it's interesting, just as a little aside there, something I find myself really fascinated with, including recently when there's been all the discussion about Jaguar Land Rover being closed down. And, what about the 150,000 jobs that depend on this? Yeah. I don't remember us crying for the tobacconists when we banned smoking. I don't remember us crying for all those people who used to work in the cigarette factories in Bristol.
Like my two grandparents in Belfast, actually. Yeah.
There you go. So I don't remember us weeping and worrying about that. We just said, well, tough. They're in a toxic industry. They need to lose their jobs. And yet we have another toxic industry, and suddenly the jobs are all suddenly sacrosanct, which again, most normativity, I would argue.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, cars have a function. But so do so many other things. Yeah. So do kitchen knives, but we expect people to use them responsibly.
Yeah.
So do firearms, but we expect people to use them responsibly. We could say this about almost any other object in the world. Yes, it's useful, but if you're going to go around killing people with it, or hurting people with it, or impacting other people's quality of life with it, we wouldn't tolerate it. It's that we've got this one unique item where all bets are off, and we go, yeah, we're fine. Yeah, it's useful, and if for it to be useful to you, you need to poison me. Go ahead.
Yeah.
We don't do it elsewhere.
No, it's a really interesting concept, and there's a lot of you sort of call it whataboutery. You know, will cyclists go through red lights, pedestrians cross the road looking at their phones, and I find that just the oddest thing, because I'm like, let's look at the data on killed and seriously injured people, and the common thread is in almost 100% of cases the presence of a motor vehicle being driven by someone dangerously, carelessly, under the influence, or whatever it is. These actions have incredibly different levels of outcome, and yet we try and hold them to the same level of responsibility. It's just a really interesting side. Northern Ireland doesn't have the recent highway code changes that happen in GB, which is maybe the beginning of the conversation in GB trying to address that. We still have a consistent message from our politicians and civil servants of shared responsibility. I saw the ad today of the guy saying, I know these streets as a pedestrian, and he's walking across the streets with earphones in, as if that carries the same level of responsibility as someone driving with a mobile phone in their hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, there's that immediate, it's that classic libertarian or liberal thing of freedom from and freedom to, which is a big part of this. And of course, we're often, when people talk about the freedom to drive, they're very often wanting the freedom from responsibility and the freedom to drive. But even, I think what's interesting with what you say though as well is the very few exceptions to the problem. So yes, if you look at these matrices you get of who has killed whom over a period of time, you'll always get this odd one of, you know, there's a pedestrian in the UK killed by a cyclist.
Yes.
I guarantee you that that's an infrastructure failure. That's almost certainly because those two people were expected to share substandard space.
Yeah.
Why were they expected to bundle together in a tiny little strip of space, or why was there a conflict built in? Because both of them are expected to get out of the way of the important motorist. Public space is motorists first, and everyone else has to work around them. And we build in conflict, we build in danger to pedestrians. You know, a lot of the debates that we see, if we look at the debates around floating bus stops that's going on at the moment, if we look about the debates about shared paths and so on, we wouldn't be having these issues if we weren't saying, well, obviously the motoring comes first and everyone else has to just fit around the edges.
You're sitting looking at a 5-lane road with a shared footpath, and you can't see the 5-lane road when you're designing space for cyclists and pedestrians. It's like it's just untouchable.
That is literally my commute. So once I get down to Swansea seafront, I cross a 4-lane highway, which is completely untrammeled for motoring, and get onto a little shared path where there's lots of conflict, and twice I have to stop and cross the 4-lane highway, press my button and wait for permission.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I was saying to you earlier, having chatted to Mike Lydon, the urbanist, a couple of weeks ago, you know, a lot of what urban planning is these days is trying to undo this period in the mid-century where we made, maybe fairly, you know, assumptions that everybody would have a private vehicle. We quite quickly realized this is not a scalable model in a city, but it seems really, really difficult to undo what was a fairly short period in our transport history. I find it fascinating, you know, even on the street I live on, say, they're you know, a lot of the houses would have, say, a single car driveway. We've put driveways on the other side of the footpath. So 3 times in the first year I moved to that house, myself and my child nearly get hit by someone on the footpath. There are cars also parked on the footpath, but you know, this is built in, and it has been built in for many years. Why do you think it's so difficult to change this cultural mindset, despite it being a relatively short period in our recent history that we built for it?
Well, I mean, that's a massive question.
Yeah, it is.
And I think there's probably a lot of answers to it. Surely part of it is people not grasping the whole of the problem. You know, something I've been really pondering recently is what a tiny part of the problem most people see. So, you know, we were saying just earlier, if you drive everywhere, as a lot of people do in this country, then if someone says to you, what's the problems with transport, you're probably going to focus on what the problems are from a driver's perspective alone. I've nowhere to put my car. There's too much other cars on the road and things like this. Fuel's too expensive.
Yeah.
You'll focus on those things.
Parking's too expensive.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll be entirely based around your needs as someone who's driving around with 4 empty chairs in a massive metal box. But even in the transport world, even in the health world, people are often seeing just little bits of it.
Yeah.
So my running joke is, tell me what you care about and I'll tell you how the answer is less cars. And I think one of the places that most matters is government. Because, of course, there's this joke in universities, so going from one joke to another, but there's a joke in universities of the real world has problems and universities have departments.
Right.
And we're fragmented into, actually, maybe, the real problem is this, but the geographers are over here and the health people are there and the biologists are here. And it's very similar in government. The real world has problems and governments have departments.
Yeah.
And this is one of the biggest problems. Now, we know, as people who work in this space, that our overuse of cars and our addiction of cars and our forwarding cars in all the decision making causes problems across everywhere. It causes problems for transport. Department for Transport deal with that, or the equivalent. But it's a health problem, and it's a social isolation problem, it's a legal problem, it's a justice problem, and
housing.
Housing really good.
Yeah.
Where do the shops go? Where do the hospitals go?
That's it.
So it actually affects every single facet of life, and it's one of the reasons I study transport. Is it's so central to our lives. But the impact of that means it's a little bit of impact in that department and a little bit of impact in that department and a little bit of impact in that department, and it never gets addressed because people are either just seeing a little bit of the problem or just tackling a little bit of the problem, and we never get that holistic approach which is actually needed here.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned the word freedom quite a number of times, so I will segue to the event that you're going to be doing tomorrow up at Stormont, which is titled Freedom for All, What Real Transport Choice Looks Like. So what does real transport choice look like? Because when I watch car adverts and when I was growing up and when I was getting my license at 17 years old, freedom to me looked like having access to a motor vehicle that I could take my friends in, that I could pick people up in, that I could do my shopping in. So why isn't that real transport choice, Ian?
So I can't remember who said this, but somebody said the problem is basically a geometry problem. There is not the space. There is not the space for everyone to drive. And again, I'm going to steal another line from someone else. Where everybody drives, nobody drives.
Yeah.
And it's a space problem. So I think what we need to get to is, it's not ban cars. It's not nobody drives. Where we need to get to, and I'm particularly drawing on the work on habit and decision making here, we need to get to a position where everybody's freedom is that they've got a menu of options, both in reality and in their heads. So imagine a world where everyone in Belfast wakes up in the morning and goes, where am I going today? Okay, well, I've got 5 ways I could get there. Which is the most appropriate for what I need to do today? Okay, well, I'm going to the shop. I'm on my own. It's 1 mile away. It's not raining. I'll jump on a bike.
Yeah.
Or equally, that same person goes, well, actually, I'm going to the supermarket and then picking this up and then picking this up. I'm going to have my wife and my child with me. It's raining. I'll jump in the car today. And that's freedom. Freedom is the freedom to select the most appropriate and the most socially responsible and healthy mode from a range of options that are opened up to you by the decision makers and by the planners.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, there's certain parts of Belfast where I think I'm right in saying somewhere between 20 and 40% of residents don't even have access to a car.
Yeah.
So when we build everything, be it hospitals, schools, public services, with the attitude that this is how do we get there by car being the first question we have to answer, that actually it's definitely not freedom for all. It's freedom for most people, you could say, because they can get there. It might not be freedom in sitting in traffic, but I think often we forget that this isn't possible for a lot of people, and a lot of people will end up socially isolated and unable to access services. So I think it's important on a population-wide scale, because the geometry isn't there. It gives us so much more scope to do other things if we can reduce car dependency. But I don't think we can forget that this isn't something that applies to everyone, and we have different levels of access because of how we build in terms of car dependency.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right about those numbers. I mean, by coincidence, about 2 days ago, I checked again how many people in Britain don't have a driving licence. it's a 26% of adults that have a driving license. Perhaps more importantly, 49% of people don't have a driving license, because when you include kids,
children, we forget about
and we
them.
forget about them. That's half the population do not have independent mobility. They do not have the ability to drive themselves and make decisions about going somewhere in a car. And half the population, I mean, is that 49%? Is that the most overlooked massive minority in existence? But even if we go, even if we go full on and we say, okay, the 26% of adults without a license, or the 22% of homes without a car, well, that's still a massive minority, but also that minority overlaps with other marginalizations. That is more likely to be disabled people. It's definitely more likely to be people on low incomes. So if you've already got these risk factors or these other things that are making you disadvantaged within society, car dependence built into society just massively magnifies those things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, growing up, I spent a bit of time in Edinburgh in Scotland, and London for probably the guts of a decade, and I've got family and friends in both. And when I think about my cousin at 12 years old going to Premier League football matches with his friends because he hopped in the tube, and I think of my friend who's older than me now, who has children in Edinburgh but doesn't yet have a driver's license, or just doesn't have a driver's license, and I think, but they probably have more freedom than I did growing up, and they probably have more freedom than I do now, and they definitely have more freedom than my kids are going to have, because again, we've totally forgotten that if a child's parent can't or won't drive them somewhere, and the only way to get there safely is by being driven, the child won't go, and the child can't get there. And I think also we forget how much growth a child gets from the independence of movement, being able to go to school. That's why we have lollipop men. It's to give children independence on their walk to school and reduce that big barrier. So for me, it's we forget as well when and there's the arms race with cars. It's often talked about, people getting bigger cars because they're seemingly more safer. We completely miss the fact that we all exist. Nobody gets to drive right to their destination. So we as a society are making things more dangerous for the transport mode that we need to encourage to make things better overall. It's quite an individualized approach to transport, I think.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're right. We talk about the first last mile of journeys, but actually you've made a really important point there about the first and last 100 meters. Unless you're going to a drive-through restaurant and a drive-through job and driving through your house, you're going to walk somewhere.
Even through a car park, which are hellish,
dangerous places. Absolutely. But it's interesting what you say about the kids. I'm going to reveal a big disappointment here. We did a piece of work a few years ago. Where, because there've been various people over the years who said, surely that commute to school independently is good for kids. Because they get wayfinding, they learn their environment, they get time management experience, money management if they're taking the bus. And we said, well, look, if it's making a big difference, if it's really making a difference, we should be able to pick that up. And we said, well, what would be the ultimate test of whether independent mobility to school actually really boosts kids? And we said, well, they should do better in the GCSEs.
Right.
And we got the data set from the Millennium Cohort study. Which has, I think we ended up with something like 8,000 children across the UK who'd done GCSEs. And annoyingly, we couldn't find any really hard evidence that independent mobility to school boosted your GCSE output. The one thing we did find, well, we found a few things, but the one that actually stood out was in the wealthiest families, so sort of the top 10%, driving their kids to school was associated with worse GCSE outcomes.
Okay, interesting.
So there's something going on. But it's not, annoyingly, it's not quite as clear as we hoped.
That's quite interesting. I mean, I was a teacher in London for about 5 years, and I'll never forget the first school I taught in, because you just end up looking at the statistics of the children in the school, and 95% of the children in that school walked or cycled to the school. And when I was there for my first year, you just see it. And actually, when I went back post-COVID, it was even more stark with the increase in LTNs, the increase in cycle lanes, the number of children in their school uniforms socialising on their way to school. So even if it doesn't help with better educational outcomes, I can't imagine it would make it worse.
But I think
for other things.
But what's really interesting as well, something you just mentioned there with the LTNs, is potentially really powerful. And if we're thinking of what we want, say, a policymaker to be looking at. Shaping that environment is incredibly important, and I'll give you an example of how important the environment can be. And by environment, I also mean the social environment as well as the physical environment. I gave a talk a few years ago in Cambridge at the hospital, and I was talking about cycling, so quite a few people there cycled. And I said, right, let's do a show of hands here. How many of you tend to cycle to get around the city? And most people put their hand up and said, right, how many of you cycled before you lived in Cambridge? And almost all the hands went down. So these people weren't, born cyclists.
Yeah.
They were made cyclists by an environment that normalised it. That's probably the most important bit. Normalised it and made it feasible and made it feel safe. And if we give ordinary people environments where cycling or taking the bus or walking feels easy, normal and safe, people are going to do it. People are not born cyclists. They're also not born drivers. It's not like a caste. These are not, but I was about to say choices. They're not even choices. They are pathways that we are pushed onto by our environments and by our circumstances. And the policymakers, more than anyone, shape those environments and shape those circumstances.
Got to be a vision for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I find that really. I was talking to you about what I like to call incidental choices. So there's a lot of stuff in the sort of active travel world, which is saying it's a good environmental choice. A lot of these things are really true, and it's a good choice for your children. Maybe we'll talk about their social environment or whatever. But I just like it when it's the obvious choice, when it's not something you choose to do because it's good for other people. You choose to do it because it's a good choice for your particular day, your particular place that you're going. One of the reasons I moved to a particular part of Belfast because it had better active travel infrastructure and things were closer. And I just love having my kids in the back of the bike. Like that's just an enjoyable day out for me because we can stop and talk to people if we see them. It's much easier to hop on and off if over the summer they love blackberries. So just things I can do when I make that choice as opposed to if they're in the back of the car. Obviously they're in the car for certain journeys and that it makes sense for that. But to have that freedom, I feel like I do have freedom of choice. It's partly because of where I chose to live in Belfast and I was able to do that. So I think it makes a big difference. The last thing I want to talk to you about, you should be proud of me that I remember the term pluralistic ignorance, Ian, because it's a full term. I find it an incredible concept because I'll let you explain it more, but essentially my starting point is, I have an assumption that on my street, I'd love it not to be used as a rat run, right? I'd love there to be more speed bumps. I'd love it to be made one way or access only. But I sort of think nobody else I wouldn't even mention it for being an outlier. So tell us about pluralistic ignorance and
Yes, so pluralistic ignorance is a concept that's been around for quite a long time, and really what we've been doing recently is looking at it in the transport context. And basically, what it refers to is the situation where none of us know what everyone else is thinking, but we do tend to guess what everyone else is thinking. And it's this repeated phenomenon that we tend, in the absence of, if you're just looking at a person in a cafe, you've no idea what's in their head, but you'll probably guess what it is. And in the absence of any information, if that person's just sat there silently eating a sandwich, you will probably get the wrong impression about what they think about things. So we tend to, when most people support an idea, we tend to assume that most people don't do it. And when most people don't like something, we tend to assume they all like it. And we've been looking at that in the traffic context. We've seen it in a few different ways, but probably the most interesting is the very recent motor normativity pluralistic ignorance work that I did with Marco de Brummelstrud from the Amsterdam University. And we got like a couple of thousand people across the UK, the Netherlands and America. So, you'd expect potentially a lot more car brain there.
We all have assumptions already, I think, about those three places.
Although, interestingly, the UK and America are almost indistinguishable on everything.
I think we like to think that
we're
not as far.
There's actually quite a few measures where we're worse than America. But so we asked people a load of questions, all randomly mixed up in random order. And two of the questions were things like, to what extent do you think it's important that people can get around with a car? And then we also asked everyone, to what extent do you think it's important that people can get around without a car? And they got these questions all mixed up, so you might have one question before the other randomly. And we measured those and we just subtracted one from the other. So if people thought getting around with a car was as important as getting around without a car, then it would come to 0 when you subtract it. And if they think getting around without a car is more important, you'd get a negative number. And in every country, it was a negative number on average. Even in America, most people think it's more important to get around without a car than with a car. We then ask them, well, as part of the same bundle of questions, we also ask them, okay, so that's what you think. How important what do you think other people would say?
Yeah.
And we get completely different numbers. So basically, everyone we measured was going, well, I think it's more important to be able to get around without a car, but my neighbour won't think that, and my friends and family won't think that, and strangers certainly won't think that. I'm the only one. And in fact, we found actually very consistently across all three countries, it was really consistently 66, 67% thought that they supported getting around without a car more than everyone else.
Yeah.
Now, you can't have 67% supporting something more than everyone else, but that's how people feel. So, and that's pluralistic ignorance. Most people don't like the status quo and are actually quite in favour of some change.
Yeah.
But they all are assuming that they're the only one because we've no idea what everyone else is thinking.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think as well also people adapt their lives to the status quo. You know, I have examples recently of a change being made to my child's drop-off times in the middle of a school year, and none of the parents using that as a choice. And I'm like, it's because we all put things in place, whereas when they did it at the start of the school year, lots of parents utilised it because they were able to say, right, that's how we'll start the school year. So I think there's a status quo thing, and we're the only ones who, you know, put our hand up. I think also when you're in the bubble, you can really make an assumption that nobody else really thinks about this, because most of us are sort of surviving day to day with, you know, getting our shopping, dropping our kids off, going to work. So you don't realise that people do think about this and just don't really have a space or a sort of a place where they can sort of voice that concern.
100%. And I think we can go back to the environment as well. You know, if you go and look at our streets, especially in urban centres, if you were to say, okay, let's look at this, you get the typical hypothetical alien. Right, let's look at this. Does this look like everyone around here likes to drive, or does this look like everyone around here doesn't like to drive? They'd go, well, obviously everyone must love to drive because look at the environment they've got. And the environment is telling us that driving is what everyone wants, because flipping heck, that's certainly what it encourages.
No, you're absolutely. I often, you know, you go through conversations in your mind sometimes, and the thing I want some people to do sometimes who are against these changes, and they say, you know, it's a nightmare for drivers out there. I'm just like, it doesn't matter where you are. I can make a fair assumption that if you look out your window now, right, or look on Google Maps at the place you are, and start drawing around the space that's for cars, you know, do driveways, do the roadways, do the footpaths if they're parked on, do the bigger car parks, look at the supermarket and how much the space is dedicated towards parking. You will have to come to the conclusion that this environment is built entirely for drivers, but you just don't think about it when you come up with an inconvenience while driving, and you may put that inconvenience on someone cycling or someone walking. You know, we get a lot of sort of comments. We'll leave it there, Ian. Looking forward to tomorrow's event.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can teach some civil servants and you know, some of the private industry and some of the politicians that these concepts are actually largely broadly supported by people. I would highly recommend people look up your work. Some really interesting studies on things like risk taking and, as you said, motor normativity, and more recently pluralistic ignorance. Hopefully we can get you over again, but thanks very much.
Amazing.
Cheers.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers.